board on this computer. Good catch, Carissa. So welcome and thank you very much for joining us to our Lunch and Learn series, Accessibility and Inclusivity of Events, Mental Health and Your Attendees. This is the third part of the series, and so far we've had very good response to the series and have been blessed with valuable insight into a lot of different areas. So thank you very much to all our panelists. So today, my name is Jody Paulson. I am the president of ILEA Edmonton chapter. I also sit on the international committee for the CSEP recertification and am a proud ILEA member since 2014. I'd like to also introduce Carissa Donahue, who is going to wave so that you know who she is. There she is. Carissa is on our education working committee and has been working tirelessly on this particular event as event lead. So thank you very much, Carissa, for doing that. So this is the final part of our three-part series, and it is serendipitous that it is falling during the week of mental health awareness in Canada. So that is pretty cool. We want to take a moment to thank both Maggie Baird, who has been a key player in the entire series. Maggie, just give us a wave. And of course, our speaker today, Blake Loates. Thank you very much. We would like to acknowledge our sponsor, our chapter sponsors this year. We have our ILEA Edmonton Legacy Partner, Invert 720, our season partner, Nate, and our chapter partners, FMAV, Moments in Digital, Planet Sound, Etc. Decor, and Special Event Rentals for their continuous support. Without them and their contributions to the chapter, there's no way we can deliver the products and services and education, the award-winning education, as a matter of fact, that you have been receiving. So we want to say thank you very much to them. Even during these difficult times, we encourage everybody to check out their Facebook, Twitter and stuff, engage. And one of the best things we can do as event professionals is to provide recommendations and endorsements for the companies that we work for. It will really help in the recovery process. I'm going to turn it over to Carissa for the next part.
Hi, everybody. Before we get started, we're going to deliver a treaty acknowledgement, which is an act of reconciliation that involves making a statement recognizing the traditional territory of the Indigenous people who call the land home before the arrival of the settlers. Today, we will be recognizing everyone from everywhere you will be joining us from. In this virtual space, we are sharing together instead of a more formal treaty acknowledgement. We would like to say this. Wherever each of you are right now, let's all acknowledge the land that we are standing on. And by doing so, we are acknowledging the relationship we have with one another in treaty relationship. It is acknowledging that we promise to live together on this land and take care of one another to help resolve conflict.
Thank you for that, Carissa. What I realized as soon as I asked them to each wave at you is that you're only seeing me because we have it on, whoever's talking you can see. So I apologize for that. You'll see all their lovely faces in a few minutes. I just wanted to just talk a little bit about ILEA and our recent campaign of ILEA Strong. So we are in renewal season. But we do recognize the difficult times that we're going through right now. But we're here for you. We're here for you, and we're here for your business, and we're here for your clients, and we're here for that community and that fellowship. So now's the time for all of us to lean in and to lift each other up. And so one of the ways you could do that is being part of a membership of a community like ILEA. It's so important now connecting with event professionals that are either experiencing similar things as you or that are in a different space but can maybe offer a little insight or some pivoting strategies, especially during self-isolation and the possibility of having to reimagine your business as you move forward. So it is so beneficial to be part of a group like this. I've been a member, as I mentioned, since 2014, and I've leaned into my membership from day one. I became a board member, I think 5 days after I started my membership, and then the year following became president. the year after that, started my work on international committees and came back as president for a second year. And so, and I think the true value of being part of a community association like ILEA is to not just network, but to learn from those that are your peers, are your colleagues, and being able to share that intellectual property that you have. So if you're considering becoming a member, we'd love to talk to you. You can just email our info@ILEA. It is renewal season, and this year, in recognition of what's happening in the world and the COVID-19 pandemic, ILEA Canada is pleased to offer a flexible payment plan for this year, and it'll most likely be this year only, but it is unique to Canada. The ILEA HQ also has a payment plan, but ILEA Canada has a unique one, and I must say it's just a tiny bit better. So visit ILEAEdmonton.com for details of that. And if you have any questions or concerns, or you need someone to chat to about the value of membership, again, info@ILEAEdmonton.com, and your email will be forwarded on to our VP membership, Rowena Chu, or myself, and we'd be happy to discuss our personal experience. And a reminder that when you come on board as a member for the ILEA Edmonton chapter, your first event is always free. So once we get back to in-person and real live events, our specialty, that event will be free. For now, as we stay in this virtual world, one of the member perks is that members always get to attend these events for free. So we thought that was an added bonus. I'll turn it back over to Carissa.
So we just have a few points about our Zoom webinar today before we get started with our guests. So during the duration of this webinar, we're asking everyone to please remain respectful and professional, and being mindful of your posts and questions, as this session is being recorded live. Thank you for keeping your cameras off and your microphones muted during this time. Please direct all your questions through the Q&A button you're going to find at the bottom of your screen. Please try to avoid asking duplicate questions, so by scrolling through to reading all the other questions. If you are wanting a question to be answered that someone else has already posted, you can upvote by clicking on the thumbs up question near that. After the conversation between our guests, they will have a Q&A time near the end, and they will do their very best to address as many questions as possible. During this time, if you have any technical difficulties, please reach out to us through the chat, which you will also find at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our very best to assist you.
So what I failed to notice is they don't have a bio of either Maggie or Blake. I just have their names and the companies they work for. But what I would like to say is, again, a very special thank you for spending a couple of hours with us today and educating us on accessibility and inclusivity when it is specific to mental health of your participants. So again, I'm going to turn over the webinar platform to Maggie Baird from MB and Company, and our guest speaker, Blake Loates from We All Believe in You. So take it away, you two.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me today. As Jody mentioned, my name is Maggie Baird. I am the owner and lead planner for MB and Company, and accessibility and inclusivity is a passion of mine. I try to start all these sessions by reminding everyone that I'm not perfect and you're all not perfect. None of us are perfect at this, but the kind of intention of this series is to start a conversation, because we often say, you don't know what you don't know. And so now you're going to know, and now you're going to have a starting place to get started. Blake's going to provide some materials that you can take a peek at afterwards. And I really do urge you, and I've done this with all of the different sessions we've done, consider this a starting point and now make yourself accountable to take this further on. So look at the resources that Blake is giving you, and I urge you to take all of those one step further. What other Instagram accounts can you follow? What other blogs can you be reading? What news articles can you be watching? Really ask yourself that. So I really appreciate that the ILEA team did a land acknowledgement at the beginning of this. We talked about that as part of the first session with Mackenzie Brown, when we talked about working proactively and collaboratively with Indigenous vendors and attendees. And Mackenzie really pushed that we look at creative and fun ways to do land and treaty acknowledgements, because we are in a creative industry. So why not be the people to change, these boring things where people are staring at a piece of paper and they haven't done the research. So I also challenge you today to learn something new about the land that you live on, whether that's a new piece of history about a nation that used to be here, or perhaps that's about, if you're in Edmonton, maybe learn a little bit of Cree today. But I do challenge you to take kind of one step today towards reconciliation by acknowledging the treaty acknowledgement that the team at ILEA provided. A fun thing we learned at our second Lunch and Learn series on accessibility and inclusivity, which was on supporting members of the queer community at your events, was that we normally say LGBTQ2S+, but the queer community is even actually looking at starting to go 2S LGBTQ+. So that's another way to acknowledge that Indigenous people were here for centuries and centuries and centuries before we were. So I encourage you to keep doing that work. If you have questions about either the Indigenous awareness session we had in the fall, or the queer community one that we had in March, feel free to reach out. I can provide some resources and a bit of a summary of what was learned there. So, but today is about mental health with your attendees. To clarify, because I know there was some questions at the beginning, we are talking about the mental health of your attendees. I know that later on, ILEA has some plans in supporting event professionals with their own mental health, and we might touch on that today, but the intention and the focus today is primarily on supporting folks who are coming to your event that have mental illness or just need a little bit of extra care and love, because you never know what kind of everyone's going through, which I think we can all be a bit empathetic to during these days when we're all living in such a stressful time. So I'm gonna quickly read Blake's bio. I didn't have time to memorize it, so please forgive me looking down a little bit, but I'm so excited she's here today. Blake does have a long history with the events industry, so it's actually really great to have somebody who's so acutely aware of mental health needs, but also really does understand our industry. So usually during these sessions, I pop in to give a bit of an event perspective on it, but Blake's gonna be able to do most of that on her own. So I might pop in and kind of provide a bit of an event planner's point of view, but Blake's been to probably more weddings and events than I have, just because of the nature of having been a wedding photographer for so long. So here is Blake Loates. She is an Edmonton-based mental health awareness advocate, using her skills and voice as a portrait photographer and former psychiatric nurse to change the narrative around society's understanding of mental health. Blake has been a mental health advocate for over 25 years. Her journey began in 1994 when she was first diagnosed with depression and anxiety at an age, and was later diagnosed with bipolar II disorder at age 20. At the time of her diagnosis, she struggled to find people willing to talk openly about their experience and knew something needed to change. Over the last few years, Blake has become an active voice in the community, raising awareness and opening a conversation around mental health with her initiative, We All Believe in You. And if you don't know about We All Believe in You, you'll know everything about it today, because we'll talk about it a little bit. We All Believe in You began as a portrait series in which Blake photographed and interviewed over 50 individuals about their journey with mental illness. Through these interviews, Blake quickly learned that the overarching theme for these individuals struggling with mental illness was a lack of connection, community, and understanding. Blake aimed to solve this problem and create a Facebook community for individuals struggling with mental illness. Fast forward for years, and WADI has become a nonprofit mental health peer support community of over 1,000 members that hosts meetings and activities to help people with their mental health journey. Blake has provided education and consultation services to clients such as ATB, Alberta Blue Cross, Edmonton Public School Board, Alberta Health Services, the Canadian Mental Health Association, and the Mental Health Commission of Canada. She was the spokesperson for Access 24/7, the mental health clinic here, and the suicide prevention strategy. Blake was a 2017 recipient of Avenues Magazine's Top 40 Under 40 and the Mental Health Association Nadine Sterling Award in 2019. and the only Canadian to be selected for the Facebook Community Leadership Program, which is actually a really cool program where Facebook acknowledged people who were doing good through different forms of Facebook groups. So Blake has really leveraged the work of that, and yeah, was the only Canadian. If you check out her Instagram, you can see these awesome photos of people doing amazing work around the world, and there's this map of the world where there's like dots where everybody's from, and Blake is like the shining star in Canada. So we're very lucky to have her today. The format for today is I'm going to let Blake kind of introduce herself a little bit more, talk about a couple things, and then I'm going to do some kind of predetermined questions, mostly things that I think are beneficial for us to talk about. And then we'll go to open Q&A. So as Krista mentioned, please try and put those questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat box. We'll try to catch anything that is in the chat box, but sometimes it's a bit hard. So if you want to guarantee your question is going to be asked, please put it in the Q&A and put it whenever you want, because it doesn't distract us while you're doing it. So I'm going to hand it over to Blake just to kind of welcome you and kick us off, and then I'll start asking some questions.
Okay, hello everyone. It's I've been doing so many of these Zoom calls, but I have never had to present, so bear with me. And I showered today, so that was nice. I showered, put on some makeup, dressed up, and I have pants on too, so that's a plus. Anyways, the first thing I wanted to go over when talking about mental health or addictions of any kind, I think it's super important that we start off talking a little bit about trauma-informed care or trauma-informed practice. It's something that we talk a lot about in mental health, and I thought before we started this conversation, I just really quickly wanted to go over what trauma-informed practice is. It's a huge subject. I actually linked in the resources, there's a little link about trauma-informed practice and care. Just gives you a bit of an overview of what that means. It's a pretty simple concept. Basically, it just means that we should all understand that trauma is often very closely tied to substance use, mental illness, stigma, healthcare access barriers, and other challenges. Trauma-informed practice means recognizing this link and making sure that people feel safe and are not re-traumatized by their care. It means to see the world through a lens based on the assumption that everyone has experienced trauma, and to provide services that provide safety and does not re-traumatize the participant. So basically, because of my work in mental health and because of a lot of the clients that I work with these days, I just basically assume that everybody I come in contact with has trauma in their life, and I use that lens to understand some of their behaviors, some of why they do what they do, why they feel what they feel, and I try and use it even in like my photography practice, and I also really use it in the mental health work I do. I think it's really important that vendors start looking at it this way too, because often we make decisions without really thinking about the trauma that people, that our participants might have. And once you kind of put that lens on, and maybe it would be really beneficial when you're planning an event or a part of an event, just put that lens on every once in a while and think of, okay, I'm going to put my trauma-informed practice lens on, and I'm going to look at all of the things we're doing in this event and see if anything in this event might re-traumatize a person or be not very safe for the participants. So that's one thing I wanted to start with, and then that kind of will guide the rest of our conversation. But back to you, Maggie.
Just before we get kind of started, Blake, on our kind of predetermined questions that we have, can you give some examples of what things are, and I know we'll get into this a little bit later, but just while we're touching on it, some examples of some things that could be either re-traumatizing. And again, we don't obviously want to re-traumatize the participants here, so we can be like cautious about how we're talking about it. But I think because trauma-informed might be a new concept to people, so just a couple examples I think might be helpful.
Yeah, so I go into it a little bit more, but basically discussion of, or even when you're planning events, you can think about stuff that trauma-informed is trauma related to sexual assault, trauma related to war or violence, trauma related to substance abuse, trauma related to mental illness. there are multiple different types of trauma, and it's really important that we kind of think of those things when event planning, or being a part of event, thinking about people's trauma. We can only do our best, and a lot of people have trauma around certain topics. A lot of people with eating disorders have a lot of trauma around diet talk, weight talk, any sort of fat phobic kind of comments. So I'm constantly learning about trauma and trauma that's associated around certain events, and we can only do our best. And I'm learning every single day that, I've been called out on some of my fat phobia, trauma related stuff. And so I'm just learning every single day too. So we just need to try our best, I think so.
That's a great point. And Blake has mentioned the resource list, which we will provide at the end of this, and then it will also be in the ILEA newsletter. So if you haven't signed up for the ILEA newsletter, sign up for that to get it. And we are going to actually touch on some really specifics here, but we will include that in the newsletter and in the resources, so you'll be able to kind of review those. But I think Blake makes a great point that you can only know so much, but maybe this is the moment where you start a list for your own company that's like, okay, we need to keep examples keep all these things in mind. And I mean, speaking of the time we're in right now, there is going to also be trauma that comes out of this that's going to shape the way that we have to plan as well. So I think as society changes, also there's new trauma that's coming to the surface that people are experiencing that we're learning about. So it's a great point from Blake. This kind of stuff, this whole series, we can't do them, do all of this year and say, okay, we're done all of those areas, because everything is constantly changing and new people are bringing their thoughts and voices to the forefront. So we have to keep that in mind, that it's constantly flexible and changing. So, okay, let's kick off kind of our first little section of questions, which is basically around terminology. So we've talked about this terminology piece in all of the different sections of the Lunch and Learn series, because we want to make sure that we're speaking about people in a way that provides dignity and that doesn't create a differentiation of somebody being better or more important or whatever. So Blake, if you don't mind, if you can touch on kind of some of the terminology that we should be keeping in mind.
Yeah, so this one is a bit trickier, only because certain individuals have certain preferences, right? So my preferences may differ to another person who is struggling with their mental health. So once again, do your best. And if someone educates you on what they prefer, then it's a great idea to try and morph into what they prefer or make adjustments based on that. But there are a couple things that I think that are really important. First of all, try and use non-stigmatizing language, like that client is crazy, or that bride is psycho, or that florist is so bipolar. Like, I know we've probably all said these things, but they're not appropriate. And another thing that I included is there's a lot of debate about the term of using mental illness versus mental health. Some individuals prefer to be referred to as someone who's struggling with a mental health issue. Some people rather call it a mental illness. That one's a bit tricky. I have personal preferences, but that one is a bit hard to kind of always use the same thing all the time. But we really encourage people to use person first language. Which means instead of saying he's mentally ill, you would say something like he is experiencing mental illness or mental health struggles. I use that a lot. Mental health struggles is usually what I say. Instead of she's bipolar, you could use terms more like she has bipolar. We just don't want anyone to ever feel that they are their illness, because I am not like Blake's bipolar. No, Blake is a very caring, loving individual with a big heart who happens to be bipolar. So I never want to be identified as my illness. And I personally prefer the use of the term mental health struggles or mental health challenges. Mentally ill, for me, is kind of stigmatizing. But other people have different preferences for sure. This is one that all humans just should know. that we do not use the term committed suicide any longer. If you follow me on Instagram or Facebook, I talk overly about this. Committed suicide is a term that we used in the past when suicide was a crime. So like committed murder, committed an armed robbery, committed suicide at one point was a crime. Instead, now we use the term died by suicide or died due to their mental illness, like died to complications of schizophrenia. So we don't use that term committed suicide. I try to educate everyone on that. It may not come up in the work that you do, but I think it's important that that education is spread. And honestly, if you make a mistake, just apologize and ask what language is preferred by the person that you're conversing with. You know, I'm not one to really correct people a ton, only because I know everyone's doing their best. But I can correct someone with the term committed suicide. People with mental illnesses are not criminals. We are unwell. So, but in terms of terminology, those would be the main ones that person first language is really important. So.
Yeah, and person first language will come up if we continue this series again. If we talk about, if we have meetings with people with any form of a disability, that'll come up again as well. We talk about, you know, someone, a person who is deaf, not a deaf person. So these types of things will keep coming up, and you will, for those of you who've been to all three, you are going to see some commonalities between all of these different aspects to consider. So now this is an interesting one, especially for the group we're kind of talking about right now. Is often when we're trying to communicate that we are accessible in different ways, we might talk about it publicly, but this kind of seems like a bit of a gray zone of how do we say to an audience, you know, if you're having mental health struggles, we're a safe space, you know, because it's a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about that we're doing is really nuanced and kind of or I feel as an event planner, it's not always something that's like interesting to be like, we don't have strobe lights, you know, like that's kind of a weird thing to announce as part of your marketing. So Blake, what have you heard about kind of good ways to let people know that your event is a safe space and that we have taken all these pieces into consideration?
Well, I really actually had to think about this question because I've never seen it done. So I've never seen an event say like we're a safe place for people with mental health struggles. So I really had to stretch my brain on this one. But one thing I thought of that I think would be amazing is because a lot of times on like registration forms, it asks stuff like, do you have any physical disabilities or physical challenges that we need to accommodate? I posted this in the We All Believe in You Facebook group, this suggestion, and because I wanted to know how people thought or what people felt about it. But on the registration forms, you could put a little space that's like, do you require any accommodations for a mental health concern? That if you phrase it that way, you never, like the person that doesn't feel like they have to say, well, I have schizophrenia or I have this disorder, or I have PTSD. They don't have to reveal any of that information. You're just asking, do you require any accommodations for a mental health concern? If so, please feel free to let us know. And what is the best way to contact you regarding these accommodations? People with mental health issues often don't like the telephone. So I am one of them. Like through email is a good way to contact, but just ask them how they prefer to be, and get in touch with them. The reason why I included that bit is because I realize that an event planner or a vendor is not going to be able to accommodate all my concerns. However, it would be great if someone could contact me about that and say like, these are the steps that we have taken to help with a person's mental health. Unfortunately, we can't make the event void of the color pink because you have trauma around it, but you know what I mean? Like, just show them that you're taking that initiative and that you care is great. The Wavy communities like flipped out when I suggested this. They were so excited because even if the person doesn't, like, say I was registering for an event, and even though I have a mental health struggle, a mental illness, I may not put anything in there, but by seeing that part of the registration form, I know that you guys care. So that is excellent. I would be so excited if someone did that. And then a person in the Wavy community said, I was at a conference and they asked if I had any needs due to my mental illness. I was able to ask for an aisle seat, so I didn't feel penned in without a place to escape. And I got a table for my meals that was near an exit, where I was still able to see the doors opening and closing, so I wasn't startled. So any accommodations that you can do in an event is so helpful. So I think that is the biggest thing.
Yeah, those are great examples, because sometimes what I struggle with this stuff is you don't want to show off, but you want to make sure that people understand that you're doing the work and that you care. So that's a great way of not kind of like raising a flag and showing off too much, but it does provide the people who are looking for it will notice that that little piece has been done, which it's kind of like tech writers a little bit, where people are like, I want only white M&Ms. They don't actually care about the white M&Ms. They want to make sure you read the rest of the rider. It's kind of the same in the sense that if you've had the thought to put that in the registration page, it likely means you've taken other things into consideration. So
yeah, for me too, it's like introducing yourself with your pronouns. Like it's not that I totally care about how people refer to me, but I'm showing people who, who want to be referred to by different pronouns, that they're a safe place, like that I am here and I understand and I'm a welcoming environment for however you identify. So
totally. Yeah, actually that's a really great parallel I hadn't thought of, but yeah, that's awesome. Okay, next we're going to move to event specifics. So this is the nuts and bolts that everybody's probably really excited to hear about. So I see you have an awesome list right here, so I won't hold you up anymore. If you want to provide a list of how we can support attendees tangibly at events.
Yeah, so I asked a group of 1,000 people what they thought about this and got a few answers. And I also had, because I'm in the event industry, had a lot of my own suggestions. These are people who, often aren't involved in the event industry, but have had some experience of things that really helped them. So buckle up. This is a list of 30 items. And so here we go. So number one, I included something called a mental health manifesto, or like a blurb at the beginning of a program guide. So if you're in an event or a conference and you have like one of those big packages about the event and a welcome, having like a mental health manifesto at the beginning, just being like, we care about your mental health, or your mental health is paramount to us. And then you can say, here's the things that we're doing at the event to kind of help with your mental health. If you have any concerns, please feel free to reach out to one of us. What I'll do in the next 29 points, these are things that you can do to help accommodate people's mental health. Overwhelmingly, people stated that they really enjoy when an event has a quiet space, just like a decompression space. Some people suggested that like it has, like mindfulness stuff, or just, scented oils and blah, blah, blah. Honestly, for me, all I care about is that there is a quiet place where I can just go and retreat for myself. So if you want to make this space like a self-care space with added extra things into it, you totally can. For me, my main concern is just having a place where I can escape the event and just decompress. I think there's been a lot of talk about fidgets. Like people have a lot of fidgets nowadays, like in classes and stuff. Those are actually really beneficial. We have them in our Wavy meetings. If you're thinking of a fidget, like fidgets, they have specific fidget toys. Some people really like squeezing those balls. Any sort of thing that people can kind of be tactile with can really help individuals who have anxiety or also have like attention deficit issues. It may look like to people that, if a presentation is going on and they're fidgeting, that they're not paying attention. In fact, they're paying attention even more so. The ability to fidget really helps them pay attention even more so. One thing is lighting. There was some concerns about some trauma-informed practices regarding lighting. Some folks found it really difficult when the lighting was so dark that they felt unsafe. Like I completely understand ambiance and like making the event seem like classy and gala-like and having all that dim lighting. For an individual who has trauma, like PTSD, sometimes those really low lights can be really difficult. Plus, like strobe lights constantly can be really difficult for individuals. If you plan on having any amount of strobe lighting, I think it's really great, wherever possible, to let individuals know that that will be happening at the event and they can prepare for that. So that's really handy for individuals. I'm just going to my next page. Any loud or sudden noises, like loud bangs, can really trigger people's PTSD. So if you are going to have loud and sudden noises, it is great to have a disclaimer. And if it's like a program guide, or, you know, people walking into the event. I know they do this sometimes for theater productions, which is a really great idea, because it just prepares the individual that this will happen. So also gives them the choice of whether or not they're going to participate. And overwhelmingly, people just really stated that they want choice. They don't want anything to be sprung on them. So wherever possible, just really give people a heads up that anything at your event is going to happen. Another thing that people suggested were earplugs. I'm not entirely sure why people said earplugs, but just generally, like if maybe the sound is too loud and they kind of just want to tune it out a bit, earplugs really help. Oh, this one was really great. If you could have advanced seating for people who needed it, maybe that is one of the accommodations you can make, where someone asks like, yes, I have a mental health challenge and I would really like seating arrangements or whatever. If you could give like a 20-minute window before the doors open for people with mental health challenges to come into the event and choose their seating first. A lot of people with mental health challenges, I know myself included, I like to be near doors. I don't like to be deep into an aisle. I like to be on the outside of the aisle. A lot of that has to do with extreme anxiety. I don't like people on both sides of me. So I like to always know that I have an out. So if you could give people with mental health challenges advanced seating, that would be amazing. Advanced seating or even assigned seating would be incredible. There was also, it comes up later, but some individuals really like to have chairs against the walls. Some individuals with PTSD or histories of sexual assault or violence really don't like their backs exposed. So if you can, wherever possible, have some seats against the wall, that really makes individuals feel safe. Especially against the wall and near a door is really, really helpful. Another person suggested if at all possible, there could be a reduced fee for a chaperone, or like someone or a safety person to come with them. I totally get this one, because sometimes anxiety is so overwhelming that it's really hard to get to an event. So sometimes it would be nice to be able to bring a person to come with me that isn't necessarily there for the content, but they just really, it really helps an individual to get to the event. This one will be up for debate, I'm sure, but a possibility of a reduced cost or a possibility of a refund option for people with mental health issues. People with mental health challenges really live day by day, and some days are really, really, really bad. And a lot of individuals with mental health issues really want to participate in events, but they're always thinking, what if I have a bad day? So maybe not having, if you're not feel comfortable with the refund option, what would be great is the possibility of having the event either recorded or televised, or a virtual option. So I get into that in a bit in the end. Someone said that they really like when there is pads of paper and pens throughout, or notebooks at the tables, so people can write down or scribble how they're feeling or what they're learning. a lot of people find it difficult when they're feeling anxious that they have to like go to their phone to write things, because then it looks like they're not listening, and then people become really anxious that people are judging them because they're not listening, but in fact they're on their phone trying to like manage their anxiety yet participate. So pads of paper and pens are a lot less stigmatized. So if you could have those, that's really great. I love it when I get journals and stuff. If you have the budget for that, that's really handy. Adult coloring sheets, I know they're super trendy, but they're actually really beneficial to individuals with mental health challenges, because that, for me, I know when I'm engaging in an activity like fidgeting or coloring, I actually am able to hear what I'm learning even more so. So adult coloring sheets are always an option. I think this next one is really, really important. Wherever possible, it'd be so incredible if each event could have a designated mental health helper in the crowd and or lobby. I've been to events where really, really triggering information was discussed. Like, oh my goodness. And I actually was at a photography convention where the presenter was talking in very vivid detail her sexual assault. I personally have never been sexually assaulted, but I felt the collective stress and energy of this presentation, and I ran out of the room during the presentation and like started sobbing. And I never had been sexually assaulted, so I can only imagine how the other people in the room who were feeling. So I suggested after that to the organizers that it would be really great if you're going to have really deep like conversations like that you have a mental health person there who is known to everybody, like maybe wears a t-shirt like mental health helper or something, that people can reach out to if they become really triggered, if they're having thoughts of self-harm or suicide, just someone who has some amount of training to kind of help. I think every event should have this, because you'll never know when an issue is talked about that really triggers a person. Like for me, I get really upset talking about money, and it seems like a very harmless thing to most people, but for me, it's really difficult. So you never know what a person's trigger is. So it's always good to just err on the side of caution and have a mental health helper there. And it's also great if you have if the actual talk or presentation is happening, have the mental health helper in the lobby so that if a person exits, they have an easy access to them while the talk is happening. A really good thing for events to have is like an actual protocol amongst the event staff about what we should do if a person becomes triggered or needs assistance. I lead in-person peer support, well, not in person right now, but I lead in-person peer support meetings every week, and we have a mental health or a trigger protocol. So what we do when a person becomes triggered, and all the participants know about it, and all of our staff know about it, and volunteers. So if you should become triggered, here's the series of events that can happen. People with mental health issues also really like to know what's going to happen. So wherever possible, if you can give a schedule in advance, that's really, really handy. A lot of people with mental health issues don't deal with change really, deal with change super, super well. I know events change, but we really like to have, oh, sorry guys, when I talk, I turn into this like mess, but I'm fine. I'm not having a health crisis. So yeah, the schedule in advance is great. A map of the event, preferably in advance, would be great too. Individuals with mental health issues like to know when they have an out, like to know where the doors are. Yeah. Another one is breaks between the sessions and speakers. That generally happens anyways, but sometimes even just a 15-minute break between each session really helps a person kind of collect themselves. If they are feeling triggered, then they can go and find some help. I said it before, but some chairs placed against the walls is really helpful. Another one is sober cocktails, and preferably at no fee if possible. But sober cocktails, we really need to normalize that not everybody drinks, and that not everybody wants to participate in consumption of alcohol. So if you can have sober cocktails wherever possible, and advertise that, and so that people are aware. And I think it's really something to celebrate too. I think it's awesome when events have sober cocktails, and make them like, you know how they have fancy alcohol cocktails, like sober cocktails that are fancy, you know, we want to feel special too if we don't drink. So wherever you can, tell people what to expect throughout the event, like with schedules. But yeah, just generally let people know what's going to happen. Oh, here's one for me. Even like talking about it makes me anxious. Icebreakers. Icebreakers should be voluntary participation. So icebreakers where it's like turn to your neighbor or get into a group of 3 can be really, really anxiety inducing, like to the point where I don't even want to go to events because of icebreakers. So if you're going to do icebreakers, I think they're a great idea. However, if you could do them in a larger format, so like if it's the entire table, or you separate the entire event into colors and you have to find your color or whatever, but just generally larger format so the person has the option to not participate, and that it's not weird or abnormal if they don't participate. I know a lot of events will have like networking events at the end of a conference. They'll be like, okay, here's an hour to go network. Well, oh my God, that is like, I have to drink 3 cocktails just to go to a network event. So, which is not what you want to do for people with mental health struggles, but networking events with some amount of facilitation are really, really helpful. That way, if there's like a game or some sort of activity, it's really helpful for people with mental health struggles, because it's so like, I'm just not going to walk up to a person and start chatting with them. It's just, I'm not good at that. So yeah, networking events with facilitation are way easier. Also, if you're not feeling good about having a chaperone, like where I talked about people being able to have a chaperone for the entire event, allow individuals to bring like a guest to the networking event, and that way that they always have like a safe person with them. Like I would go to a networking event if I knew that I could bring my best friend, who might not be a photographer, but it'd be great if I could bring her just to make me feel safe. Another option is like allow people to get to know each other before the event, possibly through social networking. That way people already feel comfortable with some of the people that are going to be there. Basically, anytime you provide participants any opportunity to choose their experience, do it. So if you can give them the option of like, if you have concurrent sessions at the same time, so one is about, I don't know, money, and one is about mental health, like just really allowing people the opportunity to choose their experience. Oh, okay. So maybe can you do that little slide? Okay, so last night on Canva, it took me about like 5 minutes to do this, but I created like a branded postcard for people to put on like tables. And you can put this like everywhere on the registration tables, on the tables in the event, everywhere, where it just says, we care about your mental health. Like I made it look super cute. And then the next slide. So I just put my logo on it, the We All Believe in You logo, but you could brand like this card with like your logo or whatever event is, and then just write, we understand that the topics we discussed today can be difficult on your mental health. If you're struggling, please feel free to reach out to one of the event's designated mental health support staff. And then I put some resources. I used Edmonton resources for this one, but I wrote, you can also call Access to Your Friend, blah, 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 blah. Always put, if you're in imminent danger, please proceed to your nearest emergency room. And then just something about, that we care and we want your experience to be safe. And if there's any way that you can make it safer, just let them know. I think the branding is a really cool idea. I'm telling you, if I walked into an event and this card was on a table, I would be taking photos of it. I would be like Instagramming it. I would be showing everyone it, because that is like the ultimate way you show a person that you care about their mental health. So yeah, I think that would be a great option. Yeah, so any sort of mental health stuff that you're doing at the event, you can put on the little card, and you can make it look super cute like I did. And it took like 5 minutes. Okay, let me just see. Any sort of mental health resources, put it in agendas, meeting documents, and like I said, brand them, because I think these are so awesome. Like, I know you want to do stuff because you want to do it for the good of the people with mental health struggles, but I think it's a great opportunity to brand stuff. I don't know. I think I would love to see a person's brand on it. What else did I put? Oh, support animals wherever possible. Like, what's wrong with some puppies in a room? Everyone loves the puppy. But there's designated support animals. So there's organizations that you can contact and get a designated support animals. Don't just bring a bunch of puppies, although I would not be mad if you did. But another option is, this is great in the time of COVID, is the ability to have virtual attendance. Either at home or say your conference room is like super, super packed. You could say, we are you can go to this quiet room and we will have the event live streamed in there. So you can sit on a couch and feel a little bit more comfy and listen to the content there. Hire individuals with mental health first aid and applied suicide intervention skills training for events. Applied suicide intervention skills training is also called assist training. Hire a mental health therapist or psychologist for your event if possible. And also, I know that therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists are the experts, but the true experts regarding mental health are the people who live with it. So wherever possible, bring in individuals who struggle with mental health, either as in a consulting format or to actually be at the event. But the power of peer support is so powerful. What else did I have here? Ability to watch recordings of sessions, because sometimes I'll be in a room and someone will be saying something really triggering, but I don't want to leave because I want to hear the other content of what they have to say. But if I knew the event was recorded, then I could leave the room and then on my own time find the content that I found really viable, like that worked for me. Okay. I cannot stress this next one enough. All of you should be writing. Okay, I know a lot of individuals who plan events, like fundraising events. So with a fundraiser event, I know what sells and what gets money are big stories. Like, a lot of times you'll bring in a speaker to tell their story about, I don't know, sexual assault or something. It is so important that we have content warnings all the time. So content warnings before a person shows up. So like when they're registering, if you can put in a content warning of what the speaker is going to say, if you can put in a content warning in any sort of written papers that you have at the event. So like if you have a program, have content warnings, or we call them trigger warnings often. I prefer the terminology content warning because, I don't know, trigger is long discussion about the word trigger, but content warning is great. And just before the speaker goes on, if the MC or the host can say, here's a content warning, this individual will be talking about sexual assault, and give a couple minutes for people to leave the room if they would like to leave the room. So if the person comes on stage or the MC is like, hey, we're going to be talking about a triggering subject, we're going to have a 5-minute break, and or even like after one speaker finishes their talk, and then the MC comes on and says, well, our next presenter is going to be in 15 minutes. The content of their discussion is going to include sexual assault, suicidal ideation, self-harm. Then you have that break, and people feel a lot less, it's hard when you have a break and you have to leave and everyone sees you leave. So a lot of people who have mental health challenges won't even leave because they don't want to be seen as leaving. So if you have that break, then they can choose whether or not to come back. I've been to a few events recently where the keynote speaker is talking about a subject that is so triggering and like in very in-depth, very scary detail, and it's really hard for individuals with or without mental health issues. So some of the subjects, such as some of the triggering or content warnings that you can include are sexual assault, substance abuse, violence, suicide, self-harm. As much as you can, please give trigger content warnings with as much possible time for an individual to get out of the situation. Another one that I thought of is if you could have a speaker or a participant code of conduct. And a speaker code of conduct is basically like, yes, we really want to hear your story, but if you could not include specific details of your sexual assault, specific details of your suicide attempt, anything that you think could be really, really triggering for an individual, if you could convey that to the speaker that we want to hear your story. Your story is very important. When you're talking of your suicide, suicide attempt, can you please not include the method of suicide attempt or like overdose or whatever? It's as effective to say I had a suicide attempt as it is to like go into detail. Is that more effective because all the details just really trigger an individual? And a participant code of conduct just is like, this is a safe place. When you share, we encourage confidentiality, just like how you want participants to not behave, but like, how you want them to conduct themselves throughout the event. And then, I think I put this again, but virtual attendance, either at home or a less crowded area of the venue. But sorry, that was a lot of content, but those are 30 points.
Those are great. I was like taking a bunch of notes during all of that because some of them I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so easy. Like, why don't I already do that as like part of our general process? And others I'm like, okay, those are conversations I need to have with clients. Like, these are things that we need to kind of be aware of. So I challenge all of you. I know some of those, like when some of this information comes up, sometimes you go like, well, that's not possible with this client or whatever.
100%.
Yeah. And I totally urge you to like read this list when you get it and like sit with it, like process it and think about like, if you could convince a client or if you could spend that money, like just go think through it, let it sit in your bones and rattle around a little bit. Because I think when I started getting into some accessibility and inclusivity stuff, I would be a bit reactive and be like, well, we can't do that. That's not possible. But then as soon as you start to go, but what if we did? You start to learn that a lot of these things aren't actually as expensive as we decide they are. And they're not actually as hard as we decide they are. So what Blake was saying about having made that card taking 5 minutes, to me, I go, oh, that's another piece to design, another piece to print, whatever. But if you really rattle around in your bones, it's just one more print material that probably has the branding that you've already developed otherwise. And things
on Canva.
Exactly, right. Yeah. Like if you're not working with a graphic designer, you can do it yourself.
Yeah, it took me literally 5 minutes. Just plopped the logo in, did the wording, stole a design from Canva. So yeah.
Totally. So exactly like Blake saying, like, let it rattle around in your bones and think about like, we are creative professionals. So like, what can we, if we can't figure out how to do some of this stuff, you know, how can we hope that the rest of the world can? So another piece that I was thinking about while Blake was talking about this, the arts community, specifically performing arts, have been doing a lot of work to try and figure out how to do these things in a creative way and in a way that honors like their art also. So I urge you, when we're allowed to go to performing arts again, to kind of take a peek at some of the stuff that they're also doing as an example. Because some of these pieces that Blake was talking about, I made like immediate connections to some theater projects that I've been seeing and how people have been kind of working them through. A big thing in the theater industry is content warnings, because not everybody actually wants to see content warnings in theater. Some people want the surprise and other people could be re-traumatized. So a lot of different theater companies have been playing with different ways to both provide the content warning in advance, but also let people opt into looking at them. So these are like some great examples you can kind of look at. Blake, is there anywhere else that you've kind of seen people set like a really great example?
No, for me, it's always been the theater community. I think that the theater community has done such a good job at so many of these, like the loud and sudden noises or the strobe lights, or, you know, like, and I'll be the first to say that I know this is a very extensive list, and that I know too that if I saw this list and I was an event planner, I'd be like, come on, like this is a lot. But like, I think that it'd be great if you could, while planning an event, take a few hours, stick that trauma-informed lens on, and just like look at everything you're doing and go, okay, well, I'm going to take a few hours, look at the whole event, and how can I make it even just a little bit safer for individuals? Give them choice. The content warnings are such a great way to give an individual choice. Like if you put them, even in like the speaker, you know, when you were trying to get people to register for an event, if you can talk to the speaker ahead of time and say, you know, like, okay, you're going to be talking about this at the event, in your description of what you're talking about, could you provide us with some content? If you think content warnings are applicable, can you let us know so we can put that right in the registration material so that people have that choice of whether or not they're going to attend your event or if they're going to go to that specific talk. Content warnings are a big one for me. So
we recently did for one of the festivals I work on, we recently did a consultation. We've been doing a bunch of consultation with folks about accessibility now that we're going online, because it's a whole new world I don't fully understand the accessibility pieces on. And one thing that they reminded us that they've told us in the past with being live is that if somebody buys a ticket and then finds out the content warning and you have a no refund policy, you've just like hooped them basically, right? So, you know, if you're paying, let's say $200 to go to a conference or whatever, and then you find out that the whole conference, every speaker is talking about X, Y, Z, whatever, and you have a no refund policy, the person lost $200 and there's nothing that they can kind of do. So it's not always possible, but I think the point that Blake and I are trying to make here is is that possible? Can we find a way to do that? Mm-hmm. And I know what some theater companies have done where they have a bit less control over knowing the programming in advance, for example, improv and all these kind of things, is they do say to people in advance, these are things that might come up and these are things that are not allowed to come up. So that agreement that Blake has been talking about, we've agreed with speakers that all of these things are no-go topics and everybody knows that. So you're clear of that. Here are some things that might come up. Loud noises, for example, you know, and then at least people can then, like Blake was saying, make their own choice.
Mm-hmm. Also, one thing I didn't include in that list of possible content warning or triggers is like any sort of homophobia, any sort of like hate talk. If you're doing a presentation about racism that you've experienced, those can be really triggering for individuals as well. So those are some suggestions. So.
Yeah, those are important ones too. And honestly, you can also Google, like every year when we do the content warnings for Next Fest, we always just Google and like email some close colleagues and say like, what's on your list right now? Because every year we seem to like add something new to it because these things are constantly expanding. So we can work collectively and do some of our own research on kind of what those content warnings can be as well. Next on our list, Blake, is just a brief chat about, because you have worked in the events industry and you've worked in the events industry, you know, we do have people who are working in the events industry with us who have mental health struggles. And, you know, especially as event planners, we're like, go, 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 go all the time. So how can we help support vendors who are working with mental health struggles?
Well, it's interesting because you and I are friends, and so you've known for a long time that I have mental health struggles, and I think that you've always been very good about, you know, and you're not always going to know. But if you do happen to know, I think one thing that I always suggest to people is just asking, how can I best support you? Not necessarily assuming the way that the person wants to be supported, but by asking, how can I best support you? You know, it's hard because if you, like Maggie, you know, I have a mental health struggle. You know, it's not like, oh God, do I have to hire a backup photographer because she has a mental health struggle? You don't have to hire a backup photographer. Often people with mental health issues have some sort of backup anyways. Like there's been a couple of times where I've been hospitalized while being a photographer and needing to shoot weddings. So so I think the biggest point is just to ask an individual how you can best support them because they're the expert. So.
Totally. And in the go environment that we're in, what are kind of some mental health supports that we can introduce?
Well, I think the biggest one that I wanted to suggest is boundaries. Like boundaries are something that I've really had to learn about, but just knowing like what you're capable of, what you're not capable of, and what you're not capable of. Well, actually, you can mention all of the time what you're capable of and not capable of. Like having boundaries, like I don't accept email, or I don't answer emails at this time. I don't answer phone calls at this time. I take the weekends off. I know a lot of people are probably like, oh yeah, right. Mm-hmm. But I think that is a really big step towards achieving a great mental health. Also, I discovered in the past couple of days that the event industry has a disproportionately higher rate of mental health issues than other industries. So there's that. So you can also include, I went to the ILEA website, and if you could, one thing you could do is include local mental health supports. That's something that could be done. Encouraging self-care. A lot of self-care is one of those terms that's just like tossed around willy-nilly these days, and it's like, oh, go do yoga, blah blah blah. And if it works for you, do the yoga. But self-care is so important, which also includes therapy, medication. So it's not, self-care just isn't just yoga and essential oils. It's also doing like hard work to get better. And one of the most important things is to create a culture of acceptance and understanding about mental health issues within the industry. So.
Awesome. I'm going to bounce around our questions a little bit, Blake, because we only have about 10 minutes left, and I want to get to some of the questions that folks have in the Q&A. I'm going to skip our little resources section because we're going to share it separately. So I don't think we need to kind of chat about that, but maybe we can kind of combine two of the questions and make it our last, of just talk about how we can build positive, mutually beneficial relationships, and what we can do to move forward together after today. So kind of just combining those two into one, if that works.
Totally. So for me, when I was asked this question, I really had to think, but one of the best way you can build positive, mutually beneficial relationships is to hire individuals to act as mental health consultants for events. So if you can have a little budget to say, hey Blake, like here's $100, can you sit down with me for a day, and this is my event, can you sit down with me and tell me where I can make this a mental health friendly event. So there's that. And then going forward from today, I think some things you can do right away is just do the personal work and try and shift your language about mental illness and mental health. Start looking at your events and what you do through a trauma-informed lens. Challenge your own stigmatizing beliefs about mental illness and mental health challenges. Take care of your own mental health, which is always the most important. And I wrote register for a mental health course. One of the resources I included was the 11 of Us website. And the 11 of Us website is Edmonton's suicide prevention strategy. And Edmonton's suicide prevention strategy now offers so many amazing courses for free, like mental health first aid, suicide intervention skills, trauma-informed care. A lot of them are not operational right now because of COVID, but there are a lot of amazing resources on that website. So
awesome. And I just shared in the chat the website links. And then when ILEA goes to send it on the newsletter, they're going to include the 30 things that Blake included to kind of keep in mind of stuff. So you'll have all of that. I'm going to move to the Q&A box. We have about 7 minutes to get through these. So just a reminder of how this works. If you see a question that's kind of related to what you want to know, you click the little like thumbs up guy, and that'll promote it a little bit higher. And if you have a question that hasn't kind of been put in yet, please put it in there. Again, the chat isn't the greatest place for the Q&A because we might have missed it, because you were all having like amazing suggestions and conversations in here while we were chatting. I'm so inspired by the amount of stuff people already said they're doing. Yeah, there's some great stuff in here. So it's really inspiring to see that this is like such top of mind. And some of you feel obviously like so seen by some of these things, which I think kind of when I got inspired to start having these conversations was like, we can say that this is accessibility and inclusivity for folks who are Indigenous. We can say that this is accessibility for the queer community, or for folks experiencing mental health struggles, or for XYZ. But often it supports everyone in the end. Like you end up supporting so many more people. A great example is working with closed captioning. Like we always think of that as supporting folks who are deaf or hard of hearing, but also people learning English for the first time, or people who have attention difficulties. They like reading the words helps people stay focused, or helps people who are learning a new language. So there's always like half of these things that Blake listed. I'm like, oh, some of those would be great, you know, for anybody to have. Like a quiet room is a great place just to take 5. Like how many times during a busy week are you like, I just need 5 minutes alone, or like in a quiet room, right? So think of it also as just, you know, supporting the most amount of people, because what we do is we bring people together, right? And of course we can't immediately right now, but that's something to definitely keep in mind. Okay, so our most popular question right now, Blake, is do you know if there's any organizations that provide mental health helpers, something similar to what like St. John's Ambulance would do, where they come on site and they provide first aid?
Honestly, I don't know. So what I'll do is I will do some researching today and get back to you. If you decide that you want to, even if there isn't an organization who doesn't, I'm sure that it exists. But if it doesn't exist, you could also, there's certain credentials that you would want to see a person have. And I can also include those credentials so that you would know, like for myself, you can see why you should bring me on into an event. But I'm sure there's mental health helpers for events. I'll find that out for you today.
Thanks, Blake. I appreciate that. Here's another one that we might need you to do a bit of help, but I also might have a suggestion on is, do you have a list of icebreakers that are more conscious of mental health and inclusivity? I find it a bit hard to think of these sometimes.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time on websites yesterday too, looking for icebreakers that would be more appropriate for people with mental health struggles. So most of the documents were like, here's a whole bunch of icebreakers. So it'd just be a matter of me going through the ones and saying like, yes, this is a good one. I Googled like icebreakers for anxiety disorders, and not a lot came up. So it looks like I might have to create a document on that because, there isn't, I tried to look for resources on that and couldn't find them. So yeah, we could, maybe Maggie and you and I can kind of work on that together. So.
Yeah, and I think this is also a great opportunity to like it's a good example of one part of an event where we have to put that trauma-informed lens on, you know, like we can think of all these different examples too. My other thought for this one was I often hire rapid fire theater to come and do icebreakers. And I've never said to them like, you know, we need to do a trauma-informed or something that supports those with mental health struggles. But maybe that's kind of a new step with them. And again, because they are doing a lot of this work internally for their own teams, they might actually have something really easy. And then you're bringing in kind of somebody to take over that piece. I mean, obviously, sometimes if you just need a quick icebreaker to get going, you don't need to bring them in, but I've brought them in multiple times and it's been really successful. So I think if you, again, frame it with them, then you might have some success too. But yeah, Blake and I can see if we can find any. Icebreakers are like the hardest thing ever.
Yeah,
I always struggle.
Yeah, no, for me, like, I think the biggest key with the icebreakers is that give the person the opportunity to opt out. And it's really hard to opt out when you're like, okay, turn to the person next to you. Like, it makes my heart just beat at a very unhealthy, rapid rate when someone says, turn to the person next to you or get into groups of 3. So if you're at a table, make the icebreaker activity for the entire table. So then that way the person has the opportunity to say, like, or you know, just gives them more of an out. So
yeah, that's a great kind of like lens to start it on. Okay, the next one is, would you suggest having the mental health staff at events where different uniform colors to be found easier? What's the best way for guests to be able to quickly and easily find them, but also in a way that's discreet if they want?
I think for one good way, yeah, I think that they should be like, there should be a visual way to see them. Also, you can, during the presentations, what you could do is have them in the lobby. So if the person left, they could go and access that person immediately in the lobby. And that's pretty discreet because everyone's in the session. Or you could also have the mental health person in the quiet space. So if a person, like say it was a break and they didn't want to like be in front of everybody and search out the mental health professional, but if the mental health professional was in the quiet room, everyone would just know, well, I'm going to go to the quiet room, that person will be there. And then it doesn't look so obvious because it's like, oh, I'm just going to have a quiet time. But, you know, then you can access the person there.
I also went to a play once that was discussing some like seriously traumatizing things, and they introduced the mental health support people.
Yeah, and introduced them.
Yeah, like right at the beginning, like they like waved and kind of said where their stations were. Yeah. So, and they said, if I'm having a conversation with somebody, assume that it's not that I'm not doing first aid because I'd likely move to another space if I was doing that. And just feel free to tap me on the shoulder and interrupt me because I'm probably just talking to somebody in the lobby who I'm friends with. And if I am doing first aid, I'll just ask you to take a moment. Yeah. And so that was, I found really helpful.
Oh, that's great.
Okay, last one. We're going to go 1 minute over. Sorry, Carissa. We have so much thought is put into the guests, but I think as event professionals, we suffer from mental health as well, which Blake, you kind of touched on. Beyond what you do for guests, I think it's important for you to know what you need for you and your team when producing events and making this a part of your plans. So I guess Chelsea's kind of more just making a comment here than necessarily a question, but Blake, have you seen anything that's perhaps been successful with helping kind of those of us actually running the event, trying to create the safe space for our guests, but also creating a safe space for kind of ourselves and the team running it?
I think if you're an event planner, you can say to the vendors, like straight off the bat, like, hey, I'm a safe, non-judgmental place to just like, if, you know, that registration question was like, do you have any mental health concerns or like, do you require accommodations for a mental health concern? You can, as an event planner, like when you're introducing yourselves or doing any event, I don't know what you guys all do. I know you do a lot, but you know, you could include a little section like asking that same question. And then that just like really opens a safe dialogue between vendors about what's going on. And even if it's not like, you know, a mental health challenge, but it could be like, oh, my aunt is really sick or my mom is really sick and this might happen. And just any sort of accommodations that can kind of be made for that individual. For me, it's just like, just having people know that this is something I struggle with. And then Maggie could ask, like, how can I best support you? I think opening that dialogue right from the get-go is great. So
nice. Yeah. And another piece that kind of we're starting to explore over here is, you know, what if somebody gets COVID, right? Like, and, you know, we're obviously not running massive in-person events right now, but every time we are doing a few virtual events, and while we're planning those, we're having to go, what if somebody is out for a week? And I think sometimes it helps when we're talking about mental health that we can sometimes frame it back to like physical health. And so we're making all these plans in case somebody gets COVID, or, you know, if somebody gets sick, or if somebody has to take a mat leave, you know, all these different things that we think of when it comes to physical health. If we're setting up all those things, then it will also serve the same systems can be put in place often for somebody with mental health struggles.
Yeah, like, and especially I think of our relationship, if you had said to me, like, you would know if I was going through a particularly difficult time in my illness. Like, I have shot weddings being completely mentally unwell, like so sick. And if I felt comfortable with a planner, I could say, like, look, I am at a really low point of my illness, very unwell. And these are kind of things that I need to happen to make this day like work for everybody. Something like, you know, I need to have my dinner in a separate room, or like, you know, and I don't know if that's, you know, some sort of accommodations, but yeah, I've shot weddings where I've been so unwell, and it's also just really nice to be able to say to a vendor, like, I'm really sick, and then have that vendor be like, how can I support you, is really nice. It's scary. A lot of people are afraid to say, like, I'm really sick right now, because they automatically assume that the person won't be able to function. And that's not the case. Like, when I'm mentally ill, like really sick, I actually do some of my best work. But yeah.
I think that's a great place to kind of pass it back to the ILEA Edmonton team. Thanks so much, Blake, for being vulnerable and opening up about this stuff. I think a good thing to remind everyone here is all the speakers that we've had throughout the year. These are really intimate experiences that, you know, we are providing payment to these speakers because this is work. Talking about any trauma you've gone through, or any way that you're marginalized, is work. And I think sometimes it takes a bit for people to fully understand that. So, Blake, I really appreciate you taking the time and talking about some things that I know aren't always easy to talk about or share publicly. So I really appreciate that. And we can hand it back to the ILEA Edmonton team to kind of close us off for the day.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. It means a lot to us. So, us as in the mentally health community. So.
Well, thank you so much, Maggie and Blake. That conversation was amazing. And as a mother of someone who has mental health struggles, I have been able to garner some information that will help me in dealing with my own child. So thank you. I really appreciate also the way, Maggie, you started the conversation today by reminding us that nobody's perfect. None of us are perfect, and that we need to embrace our flaws, and we need to accept our flaws, and we need to help accommodate all those individuals in order to make them more comfortable when they're in an event space, when they're in any kind of space. So I really appreciate that. I also think that it's a really important reminder, what Blake pointed out at the beginning of her talk, was that using a lens of trauma for informed practice. I think that's a really important takeaway here, and expanding on that would be really beneficial, and understanding what that lens might look like. You may not have experienced mental health issue yourself, but talking to someone like Blake and using that consultative approach would be really helpful and beneficial for all of your events. I really like the examples that you've shared, Blake, today on ways to accommodate. The simple addition of a question on your registration form: do you require special accommodation for your mental health concerns? And then that follow-up question, which I probably wouldn't have thought of, how would you like us to contact you? Because I know as a parent that sometimes a phone call works, and then other times it doesn't. So knowing that in advance is really, really helpful, and makes it easier to also address those accommodations. Yeah, and then just keeping everyone mindful of the things that this does help everyone. Maggie, I think you said that. Taking this kind of approach helps everyone, not just the attendees, but your speakers, your vendors, your staff, your volunteers, and even you. So I really appreciate your time today. It was really valuable. This is the only one of the 3 sessions I've been able to attend because of work commitment, and each time I've missed it, I was kind of annoyed that I was missing it, because I knew that they were all issues that, you know, me as a corporate event planner would be very helpful to know. So I thank you. So we're going to wrap up today by first talking about some of our upcoming events that ILEA Edmonton has. So first, we're going to talk about ILEA Canada's next Real-Time Real Talk conversation, which is scheduled for March 14th. It's going to be hosted by our Calgary chapter, 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. This is the 7th session to support event professionals during this time. It is free for everyone to attend. We have started to implement pre-registration requirements, just because we want to start to collecting some analytics of where people are within the country who are attending these. They haven't announced the topic yet, but watch our newsletter for that information. We also are having our very first mini wellness retreat. It is scheduled for Thursday, May 21st in a virtual format. And our very own Ashley Cruz is leading that particular event from ACE Events. And so get ready for restorative yoga and practical tips to support your mind, body wellness during this time when we need it most. So I attended portions of Ashley's full-blown wellness retreat that she had in April, and I really enjoyed it. It was April or end of March, and it was well worth the weekend. And then she sends you recordings. So this is kind of a snippet, a highlight of it. I believe she has another retreat coming out on May 16th. So please do check that out. It is a very good time and does offer a lot of information for us. And then last, on June 2nd, we have our finale of our Edmonton series at 11:30 in the morning. It's a lunch and learn just like this one. Daryl Baker from the award-winning leadership firm Kelder Leadership Strategies will lead us through a mindful session about navigating challenges and logistics, focusing on different personalities in high-pressure situations, and tools, tips and tricks to achieve success. The workshop is one that you won't want to miss, and it is the conclusion of our mini-series, Edmonton. And we want to thank also Nicole Conkin from Sugar Plum Events for leading this particular session. And I think she might have led all of the Edmonton series. So a great round of applause and a thank you for Nicole for doing that. So that's it for today. I am going to share with you, let me just see if I can still do this. So stay in touch with us. There are some resources here. Take a picture of this slide if you would like to keep it, but I've just also posted the link to sign up for our newsletter, which is that bit.ly that's on the screen. Our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram ID is on there, and then there's always that info at Edmonton, ILEA Edmonton, .com is our general email box, and you can reach anyone of the board. Oh, and I think I might have messed up that link, sorry. Then there's Blake's Instagram and Maggie's, all three of her particular social media accounts there as well. So that's it for today. I think we are pretty close to being right on time. We are. It is 1:30. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending today and joining us. And we look forward to seeing you at our next ILEA event. And have a great day, everyone. Take care.